So if you have, while I'm not a super technical person, I can answer your technical questions, but I don't think we'll talk about like the conceptualization of parsing through the data and then figuring out how to tell the story from there. So that's the stuff I can answer.
I'm Matt Carroll, can you hear me? And I am the Globe Geek, and I am also a proud Northeastern alum, although I was on the less popular 7-year plan, which took me a little longer to get through here, and despite what my wife says, I did get a diploma, although I can't find it. And I've been at the Globe for 25 years. I've been doing data for probably 10 or 15 of those years, and I work very much hand in glove with Alvin, sort of parsing the data and then handing off to Alvin, and Alvin will create the data visualizations.
Yeah, Chris Marstall, creative technologist, working in Globe Lab to sort of do experimentation with new news platforms and technologies, as you guys heard before.
So I figured we would just go through each of the things we made and talk about getting the data, trying to figure out what it means, and then conceptualizing how to present it. And if you guys have any questions like as we go, please just raise your hand and interject, because I like being interrupted. So, Chris, do you want to navigate to? Okay, so we'll start with that homicide piece on the left there, because this is okay. So you want to talk about?
Yeah. So, by the way, as you can see, this has an interesting shape. We call it the fish, and you can see it has kind of a very, very much a fish-like shape. But that's the map we used when we created the neighborhood. And what happened was, very early in the project, I was asked to help out. So we went to, one of the things that was clear we needed was police data on homicides and all sorts of violence. So we went to them and asked, we FOIA'd actually, we gave them a Freedom of Information Act request for crime data going back, I don't know how long we asked for.
30, 40 years.
Yeah, 30 or 40 years, which they weren't able to provide. But we were able to get it going back a long, long time. We ended up with after much talking back and forth, meetings and stuff like that, we ended up with a thumb drive, basically, or a CD with millions of records, including 911 calls going back to the 70s and all this crime data, which we were able to get. And then we just started parsing it, and I basically handed it off to Alvin.
So the beauty, or not so beauty, of having living in Boston is that none of the borders match up. And so I'm new to Boston, and I realized that I was going to have to figure, and in fact, this border right here is, we ended up kind of having to draw it because it didn't exist. And so it was an incredibly frustrating process to figure out which of these dots belonged in the blue and which of the dots didn't belong in the blue. And so what Steve didn't mention is the part, Steve Wilmson, our editor, the part he didn't mention is the part that I went up to him and annoyed him and asked him, like, why are these lines here? Like, why did you decide to put these lines here? Why didn't you just move it over 2 blocks so that I don't have to go through and pick out those ones that don't belong there? And he's like, well, that's, it is what it is. And I mean, honestly, it ended up working out. So that was one of the more frustrating processes, and I'm sure anyone who has dealt with geolocated data in Boston has gone through that, where wards don't match up with districts, don't match up with tracks. It is what it is.
Right.
So once we pulled out all the murders and shootings from the last 25 years, we kind of had dots on a map, and like that. And one of the issues I had with dots on a map was they're dots on a map, and they don't, like when you go to that spot, you don't see a big red spot. You just see a neighborhood where something very traumatic happened to somebody. So I wanted to get the news story that we wrote for each one of these, because we have it. And surprisingly, it is an incredibly arduous process to find the murder story that we wrote for each one of these. So we went with the librarian to pull each one of these out, and when she pulled them out for me, I was just kind of like amazed at I read through almost every one of these, thinking like, wow, it's this originally it was a latitude, longitude, a name, and the date, and now it's there's an incredible one in the middle somewhere where it's Brian Regoria, our editor right now. He wrote it. And it starts off saying, these two brothers came to the U.S. Looking to pursue the American dream, and one of them just ran into a little bit of trouble and was shot. And you get these like full life arcs for everybody, all these little dots. And I don't know if we succeeded, but it's something, and you'll see this recurring theme where you have dots on a map, or you'll have like a little icon on the screen, and trying to transform that into a person, or trying to transform that into what it actually is in reality, is always incredibly something that is always on our minds. Do you have any questions for this before we move on?
Alvin, can I ask you a question about it?
Yes, of course, Chris.
So the way that this particular map is organized is into different time sections. So there's 87 to 89, 90 to 90, to 2000s, and then what were the findings for that you? What kind of trends did you see across this time period? If we go through here, and what did that mean?
Right. So you'll see that in the 90s, it kind of the rate kind of went down. About 3 murders in Bowdoin-Geneva per 10,000, and then 1, and then it kind of went back up here in Bowdoin-Geneva, but fell in Boston. And so one of the really interesting things was the types of murders that were occurring. It's not the same population. Like there's a Cape Verdean population that moved in that wasn't existent in the 80s, and there was a if we go back even further, you have this. In fact, we have this. Can we pull up that map? That go back to the main page. The index page to that.
Yeah. Oops.
So on the left there, scroll down. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. That one. Yep. So you'll see the racial distributions just changing absolutely, radically over the decades.
So in 1950, it was. What are we looking at here?
So there's white on that first column and black on the second column.
Yeah.
And
okay,
then,
so this one, the one on the left says that this is mostly a white neighborhood in 1950.
Yep. Correct. Yep.
Okay, got it. And then in 1960, one part of the neighborhood becomes more heavily black.
But and there's that commuter rail that separates.
The commuter rail.
Yep.
And then the western part becomes less and less white, more and more black.
Yep. And busing desegregation.
And then Hispanic, and then a real melting pot, but less and less white.
Yeah. So that's something that we constantly try to put our finger on, is how the population shifted and why the violence persisted despite the population shifting over. And I mean, the story went ahead, and we still haven't. If anyone wants a project, that's a good one. So these are all these questions that came up, but we ended up boiling down to here are the murders and here are the people, because a lot of the theme of the project was there are numbers, but reach it back and get it back to representing people. Do you want to move on to it?
Sure.
And just by a raise of hands, who wants me to talk about more of the technical side of like actually building this? And okay, so about half. Okay, so the city, so a lot of this data already came geolocated, a lot of it didn't, and so we used an in-house geocoder data science toolkit, I believe it's called, which provides this really great. If you guys can, if you have questions about it, please come talk to me afterward. But they provide a really great service where Google will let you geocode 1 address per second for free, and that is fantastic if you're trying to do 100. It's painful if you're trying to do 100,000, and it's virtually impossible if you're trying to do 1,000,000. So, we basically used an in-house geocoder that turned addresses into lat longs, and then from there we tried many different ways to try to narrow down the lat longs that are within the boundaries that are shown here. For this one, I totally failed and just ended up having to draw a circle and then having to do some rough math to figure out what was inside and what was outside. But so we got to that process, and then we pulled the data set for number of people in Bowdoin-Geneva versus number of people outside. Again, having to do some rough math because census tracts, which is how the census does their population, doesn't match up with our neighborhood. And so from there, we were able to parse out these numbers, and we used a mapping library called Leaflet, and the maps come from a place called Mapbox. That got boring because it got technical. I'm sorry.
One of the problems we had with mapping everything, and always it still puzzles me a little bit, is that in Boston there are no neighborhood boundaries, no official neighborhood boundaries. And I live in Boston. I live in West Roxbury, and everyone thinks they know what the boundaries are, but everyone has different ideas of all these boundaries. So you can go to the BRA section of the city website, and you can find maps which show boundaries, but then you look at another map and they show different boundaries, and they're all a little bit different. And we've pushed the city for a long time to come up with official boundaries, which they have not done. I think it's really just political, because if you say this is the line for Dorchester and Roxbury, and someone who's lived on one side or the other says, wait a second, all my life I've lived here and it's always been either Dorchester or Roxbury, now you're telling me it's different, you're going to anger a lot of people. So I think it's just they don't want to do it, and there's no legal reason why they need to. It's not tied to taxes or anything like that. But it is very, very difficult to try to get this stuff done. And when we dealt with the census data, it's not done by neighborhood boundaries. Of course, they have their own system, and they do tracts and blocks and stuff like that. So we had to sort of carve out blocks where we had the information. Blocks are really tiny, maybe 300 people. Tracts are much, much larger, and try to make them fit our little fish as much as we could. Another thing that happened was looking at the census data. I don't know how many people here have used the census website? Okay, a lot of hands. Almost everyone. That's great. So the census data is great for 2010 and 2000, and before that, it's really pretty bad, which really surprised me. I hadn't really gone back that far, but they wanted me to get data going back to 1960. And when you start diving in there, it's horrible. It's really poorly organized. What data there is, especially once you get back to like 1970, 1980, it's all on paper, which has been scanned into the system, and it's these 700-page documents, which you have to manually start flipping through and try to find Massachusetts, then pull out Boston. It's a nightmare. So we ended up going out to a third-party business called Geolytics, which sold us the data, but it was expensive. I think we spent $2,000. I remember. I think it was like $2,000 to get data back to 1960, 60, 70, 80, 90. Which is a real pain in the neck, and I still don't understand why the census just doesn't go back and do what this company has done and basically make their stuff more comprehensible.
So this is complaints data from the mayor's hotline, or 3-in-1, correct?
Yep.
So has anyone worked with this data before or seen this data? So it's fantastic data set. Don't click download without knowing that you're going to be waiting and getting like a 500 megabyte file on your computer. So it's on data.cityofboston.gov, and we went through and we pulled out. We kind of started grouping types of complaints that you would see, and this was really nice because like virtually everyone knows what it's. The categories are very visceral, things like lead or mice infestation or rodent activity, or even property conditions and living conditions. So I just kind of threw it on there because I figured that you kind of know what these things are. I don't have to drive home that point for you. Chris, can we go to the next one? And if you have questions or comments, if you just hate it, just yell out something because it'll entertain me at the least. Okay, so this one's really yeah. So someone's running up with a mic, or someone's about to chase you down.
Hi, I'm Martha Sandler from On the Rise, day program for homeless women in Cambridge. And one of the things that I'm interested in, sort of about telling a story with data, is that I think in order to get somebody to look with interest at a graph like that, you want to have something non-intuitive. You want it to be a surprise in some way, right? So you're looking through all this data, saying, what about this data do people sort of not get intuitively already? And that seems like a big process to start with. Like in all the data in the world, how do you pick which data you're going to do this great visualization about? And the reason you're going to go to the trouble of doing that visualization is because it tells somebody something new. So I'm not sure that I am going to be drawn into a map that says there were a lot of complaints in this neighborhood. That sort of kind of is matching up with the narrative that's already out there.
Right.
But how do you find the new stuff?
Right. So one of the things that journalists are really bad at is defining what the goal is of what they're working on. Because they're like, we'll let the reporting define the facts. And it's like, you can take it a billion ways. And so that's the question I kept asking my editors is, what is our goal for this piece? Eventually, the goal for the complaints piece was, we want to give an idea of how your neighborhood compares, or if you live, assuming you live in the other parts of Boston, how that neighborhood compares to this neighborhood. And knowing the behavior of our readers, which is click, look at the map, and move on. That I think that was the accomplishment of that piece. That said, I think we in fact on Sunday you should log on to the Globe, because we'll have a more comprehensive piece to illustrate this complaints data, because here our goal wasn't to explore the complaints data. It was to help a reader quickly understand Bowdoin-Geneva and living conditions there. However, the other goals, for example, exploring the data set for the complaints data, we would have done differently. And you'll see it on Sunday.
Actually, what your question actually is it's a great question, because it's so hard to answer, and it's a question we have to ask ourselves every time we start with the data. And I always just describe it as kind of circling the drain, where you start out, really, you have a massive amount of data, you don't really know what it says, and you just start going through it and doing aggregates and sums and totals and looking for outliers or stuff that stands out, makes you surprised. And that can be very, very difficult to find, or take a long time. And you're right, there was a lot of crime there, and that was kind of, we knew that going in. So one of the things we hoped to do was to sort of break it out much more specifically and show the murders and shootings, so that you get a much finer, a more granular look at what was going on in the neighborhood. And so you can see, also, everyone would figure, okay, there'd be more complaints from that area, but we broke it down by, mice complaints and landlord complaints. So you just get a more granular look at what was actually happening in the neighborhood, to try to bring it into a sharper focus for people.
Two comments. Frank Singleton, I'm actually the health director of the city of Lowell, but I grew up in Mission Hill. And back then, it was ethnicity that drove the boundaries. You could cross a street and be in the Italian or the Polish, or in that case, it was an Irish ghetto more than when I grew up than anything else. But I'm suggesting perhaps when your racial boundary starts shifting, or your ethnic boundary starts shifting, you may actually have a shifting of perception of. And also, Mission Hill was back of the hill. There were micro neighborhoods in Mission Hill. It wasn't just one monolithic, so I don't know if you looked at that. But my real question is zip code analysis with the real estate industry, the fight that goes on in Jamaica Plain. Are you in Jamaica Plain, Rosendale, or West Roxbury? And have you looked at zip codes at all? It's not the same thing, obviously, as census tract, but there's a lot of investment in, are you in the right zip code or the wrong zip code? Was that something you actually looked at?
We did zip codes a little bit. They tended to be big, and for Bowdoin-Geneva, they fractured all over the place. I think it was 5 or 6 different zip codes, and it was always just pieces of Bowdoin-Geneva, so it was just not a great way of looking at the data, which actually is one of the problems for people who live in Bowdoin-Geneva, because it's very much, and I don't know if they addressed this in the first century, but it's very much fractured along political lines. It's broken, I don't know how many different, they're represented by a huge number of different people, so they don't have sort of the clout of, like, West Roxbury, which is like one city council district, or pretty much. So that's a problem for the neighborhood. But it also was a problem for us trying to analyze the data. So zip codes, you can do it for some stuff. I'm actually doing some, we'll be working on some building data, and I'm going to use zip codes because it's convenient. It's a convenient way to sort of look at neighborhoods, as you're saying. But for this project, it just didn't work that well for us.
Yeah, we got another one.
Okay, my name is Greg Cannon. I'm with HUD, and I spend a lot of time actually doing projects like this. And you started to answer this question a little bit, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how much knowledge you had about the data you were requesting and what you were going to do with it. You know, how far in advance did that happen? And then as the process started going on, you know, new things started popping up and said, oh, we should check out this or check out that. And then after you had the data, how you analyzed it to tell a story.
You can take part. Okay.
That's a big question.
So yeah, it is, and I almost never know what the data is going to show. I mean, you have a rough idea, and you ask, like when we went to police, you ask for certain things in the data, but you really don't know what you're going to get. The police actually were very cooperative on this story, and they should be. It's public information anyways, but they did come through after a lot of time spent negotiating with them, and we did get a ton of crime data, for instance. But you don't know what you're going to get. And that's when you start going through it. With census data, I mean, we sat down with the editors and said, what are we looking for from this neighborhood? And they, you know, when I printed it out, it was a list like this long of all these different things, single woman, where they clustered in this neighborhood, and, racial, ethnic boundaries, or where the people live. And then you just take, I don't know how many maps I did, how many data sets I downloaded, easily 100 from the census alone, probably closer to 200 easily. And then you sort of start winnowing that down and say, okay, what are the ones, and that goes back to your question earlier, which is what do you sort of focus on? And then you have to winnow it all down, because it's an overwhelming amount of data, and you try to figure out what tells the story the best. So it's a long process.
One of the really interesting things about this project was usually you go into a project knowing the story vaguely that you want to tell. And the beauty and the curse of this project was the editors and reporters insisted we're going in with no preconceived notions of anything. And so here I am with a data set saying, okay, here are about 10 different stories we can tell. Like, which one do you want to do? It's like, no, you're going too fast. It's like, but I need time to build this. And so by the time that Steve was done editing, I had 3 days left, and I was on a train back from New York on Amtrak trying to build the last of this, trying to shape the story, because the story had just become, the story arc had just kind of come into focus, and here we were trying to frame our data sets to match that and to tell the story that we wanted to tell. But this is a good example of us working well with reporters, giving us data and understanding what we wanted to do. So this is a Henry Street graphic. Henry Street is one of the streets that we focused on. The city of Boston has spent a lot of time on Henry Street with an entire makeover of it. And this is a timeline that we did of the entire, since March 2003, of everything that's happened on the street. And, the city, there's, Mayor Menino held a ribbon cutting ceremony on the relaunch of Henry Street and so on and so forth. And so Andrew Ryan, one of our reporters, basically spent all his time there trying to pull out documents on every single house on Henry Street and trying to understand how it got to where it is today. And so this is, technical talk coming here. This is built with Timeline.js. Has anyone used Timeline.js before? Okay, that is a big shame, because Timeline.js is a really cool tool for people who don't have to be technical at all. You just I gave this big old spreadsheet from Google Docs to Andrew Ryan, and he just kind of filled it in, and it kind of pushes out this really beautiful timeline that anyone can use on mobile and on desktop pretty well. So, okay, jumping back from the technical stuff. So this is a timeline that, and can you push next
Sure.
on here? So this was what I really enjoyed about this was Andrew had all this stuff, like pictures and licenses that he Xeroxed and scanned in, but he didn't know what to do with it. And so I just gave him a spreadsheet and said, like, if you want a picture to go here, put it here. And like his natural storytelling ability just kind of kicked in, and he just kind of ran with it. And so I had very little to do with building this timeline. He just kind of, curated himself, and he understood what to do from here.
And it's a wonderful story. The Italian immigrant bought this home about 100 years ago when the neighborhood is very different. It's right downtown Bowdoin-Geneva, a very prominent location. And the story that's told with this timeline is basically that, the shootings just got too much for his grandkids. And they sold the property, which is a multi-unit, kind of triple-decker, to this guy. And the documents that Andrew uncovered really tell kind of his struggle to keep the property and to maintain it. And he tells it with documents that we got from various different sources.
Scroll down here. And so, like, can you go to the next little, or the scroll down?
Oh, yeah.
So something really cool. Scroll down a little bit more.
Sure.
Or like to show both sides there. So one of the really cool things when I sat down with Andrew to talk to him about the street was, so we went on Google Maps and we kind of went street from house to house to house. And I thought it'd be like a 5-minute meeting of him telling me, vaguely what it is. And he told me like an entire story for every single house. And for each one, he told me like, here's when it was foreclosed. Here's, the backstory in that house, and here's why it was foreclosed, and here's what the unit went through, or whether the city had reclaimed the property. There's one house at the end of the street that was raided, I think, last summer. And so he had this whole narrative for each one. And so to give a quick idea of what that street went through, we kind of stitched together a panoramic of what it looked like back then and what it looks like now. And
so at the top, we're seeing
2008,
2008, and then at the bottom, we're seeing 2012. And the Moralia family owned most of the properties on the street, right?
a lot of them.
And a lot of these captions up here are telling about how they sold them, and then the bottom, it talks about how the city acquired them. Nice houses.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Still a lot of houses boarded up there, though. Took a
Yeah.
few walks. Any questions? Yeah. Well, hold on. Someone's going to come with that.
My name's Tessel Collins, lifelong Boston resident. I think the only comment I really wanted to make about this is that when you look at the neighborhood of Bowdoin and Geneva, where the Maglia family may have owned 5 to 10 properties in this neighborhood, that as they got foreclosed and got opened up again, they went from being owned by a single person to becoming condos, basically. So these homes, that this one building may have been a $500,000, $450,000 property, went and became, each one of those floors became a property that may have gone for $200,000-$300,000. And so you have this neighborhood, which is a poor neighborhood, but at the same time, the real estate in the neighborhood is changing and shifting in terms of, how it's being owned.
Yeah.
Basically.
And another cool thing that this top part captures is the city's efforts to save some of these properties. So this was a document that shows that the new landlord who bought it from the Malias was, he was afraid to actually go and board this place up without a police escort. So at that point, it was boarded up. More shootings. more drug sales, and then we hear about this rescue plan that ended up with a lot of those buildings looking a whole lot better. And there's records that he found of the new owner asking the city for help and for a loan, and eventually the city says, as violence continues, tells him that they'll give him a loan to stay in the house, but he has to keep the house, but he has to stay living there. And the sort of violence continues as the city and the owner attempt to save this property. And it's really this is not an out of the way street in the neighborhood. It's very prominent, like it's right near the the nice restaurant and the pizza shop and everything like that. So
There are a few more questions, I think. The video.
sure.
My name is Mary Jenkins. I'm from the Massachusetts Cultural Council. I'm just curious about whether or not, once you've gotten the data, in working with the reporters, there was difficulty in figuring out how to position it. Because you can show data, you can line up this data, but the implications of what the data means, I think, is where, and certainly within a news story, is not without its difficulties. And I wonder how you dealt with that.
I mean, for this Henry Street thing, it was, and for a lot of this, it was interesting because if you go back, depending on the chunk of time that you look at, the narrative changes pretty drastically. So for this Henry Street thing, we looked at the last 5 years, but you look at the last 50 years, and it's a totally different narrative. And I think we quickly found that out, and we tried to approach the neighborhood from different directions. So here we approached the data in the last 5 years in Henry Street, but we published historical maps from, I think, back from 1830, trying to show how the neighborhood has shifted. Kind of saying, like, look, even though this has happened in the last 5 years, like this, please think about, this neighborhood has existed for far longer than that. It used to be a farm. It used to be a little factory here. And again, I think it goes back to something I said earlier about what is the goal of the piece. And the goal here was, making the data help us tell the story of what has happened very recently after the city's efforts to come in and clean it up. And so,
one of the things that's actually it's been happening for a long time, and I guess it's always been happening with reporters and stuff. In the old days, they worked with photographers or video guys if they were on TV, but because of the internet, it's just much more important to work closely hand in hand so that the online presentations work with the story. And it's a very interesting, evolving process. And I have worked very closely with Alvin and other people at the Globe to, either I was the data guy or was the data guy and reporter. And it's a really fascinating sort of journey, kind of, to try to get the story and then get pictures and sound and all that sort of stuff and data to make it all work together. Sometimes it works really well. It's a lot of fun. The whole process is a lot of fun, but it's definitely an evolving thing that's going to be changing as the nature of the internet changes, I guess. So.
We had another question. No. So
Can I ask another question?
sure.
Sorry. I got the impression there were certain pieces of data that were really, really hard to get. I know that you had to go down to the police department at times like that. What was the hardest piece of data to get, and was there stuff that, why was it hard to get, and did we trigger paranoia on the part of various city agencies, and were they resisting on that level, or was the resistance just because the stuff was kind of hard to access, or what was that aspect of it?
I think there was City Hall. I think was very concerned about this because they just knew that the Globe was throwing tons of resources and their view of when the Globe is throwing tons of resources at a story is that at the end it reads, 6 City Hall officials indicted today. So that makes them very, very nervous. And, we're trying to tell them, well, it's not really that kind of story. And they're like, yeah, right, 6 City Hall employees indicted. So, but it is public data, so they have to turn it over. But you could tell that they were just totally paranoid about what we were doing, and there was just such concern. And I know at one point we had rented an apartment, and then someone at the Globe, I forget who it was now, was it someone in Globe Lab? No, someone at City Hall had said, oh, you understand the Globe's rented apartment. It was like 3 hours after we'd signed the paper that they knew. So they were paying close attention to what was going on there. So I'm trying to think of what, it was a very slow process. And, we were asking for so much data. And actually there were so many people asking for so much data that the hackles were definitely raised at City Hall. But they did come through with stuff. It just took a long time to get what we needed.
Even stuff like shootings and homicides, right, per street was not something that even they had organized, right?
Right.
By time and by street and by neighborhood.
Right. And we had to go through, a lot of that data was very, very disorganized, and it was, they're like everywhere else, I guess. The data was a mess, and they did get it to us, and it would be a total mess. We'd have to go through it and data clean for a long, long time. You realize how primitive data collection has been in the last few years.
And just the reporting even about the names of victims and stuff like that. That was at times that was hard to get, right? Or basic information, because even the Globe sometimes doesn't. The only story that will write about a homicide is before the name of the victim is known.
I don't want to say it's hard to get. It's just not clean.
Right.
Let me talk about this real quick, and I'm just going to open it up to questions because I think that works better. So this is really interesting because the presentation is, pretty simple. You click on a video, you see the video, you do that every day. However, the planning for this, which is basically us giving kids in the neighborhood flip cams to go out and shoot video for us, planning for this was really interesting because we threw around the idea like these kids have phones that take video, or they have other resources, other ways to send in video. And we explored a lot of different ways, but in the end we decided we'll give them flip cams. And one of the reasons we decided that was that we wanted to give them something physical, something that belonged to us, or that we had, so that we could say, hey, look, we want you to go out and document your life and come back with it. Kind of like the experiment where you leave like disposable cameras on a bench and see if people, see what kind of things people bring back to you. And so I thought this was a really smartly designed way of getting really great video from kids who are, if you haven't watched through this, you should watch this because it's incredibly fascinating to see the way that kids react when.
Hi, my name is Eddie Lils. I'm 11 years old, and the thing that I like about my neighborhood is because when we go, me and my friends and other friends, we go to church every day, and we sing, we practice, and all of my neighborhood is friend with me, which is cool, and I really like it because you can practice a lot of things with them and share secrets and eat ice cream, which is cool. I love my neighborhood. They all treat me good and sometimes bad because they fight. Sometimes they kill people. They don't go to church, and sometimes I really don't like those things. And I like to be nice, not rude to people. And I really love church. My favorite thing in the neighborhood is loving church.
I actually have the mic, so I'm going to take the liberty of just asking a quick question. I'm Jessica Martin from the Boston Indicators Project, and I'm just amazed by this whole thing. And a lot of resources were put into this to tell the story of one small geographic area from all these different angles. And I'm just wondering if there's some small, simple tools or steps or components of this that you think are maybe the easiest for people to scale down and use themselves without a lot of technical capacity or financial resources or time even to do some on-the-ground data storytelling and journalism.
I mean, I think the first is being able to explore the data. I mean, so the first thing, I always get college kids asking how can I get into data journalism? And the first thing I say is okay, how well do you know how to use something like Excel? And then I show them like, okay, here's how you sort, here's how you use the equal sign, here's how you make a pivot table. And I think that very basis of being able to, pull out stories from a data set is like the base. Because eventually, like, honestly, you could draw with paper and pencil the charts that you need to draw when it comes to it. And we did some flashy things here, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Just, give me a pencil drawing of what the data says, and if you could pull it out from the data set, then that's I think what is able to be scaled down.
Yeah. One really good tool is Google Fusion Tables, which is relatively easy to learn. If you can do Excel, that's a really good place to start. Then you can import it into Google Fusion Tables, and then you can match. I mean, you can do bar charts and stuff like that. Just publish them on the web very, very quickly, or pie charts, that sort of thing. And that's a great place to start. You can also then take the tables and marry them to some geocoded stuff. And I knew nothing about this until I started playing with it. It was really easy to do. And then you can create color-coded maps. You can have a map of Massachusetts with the red towns and the blue towns, all that kind of stuff, depending on how you want to slice up your data. That's a really good, really easy tool. There's a lot of good tutorials, and it's very effective, and it's free.
Google Refine is also a great tool for cleaning up messy data. So if you have a huge list of addresses and they're all spelled slightly differently, Google Refine is kind of magic to help you regularize that. And also a tool that is really amazing is Mapbox, which is better in a lot of ways than Google Maps for creating kind of custom maps that are data-oriented maps. So you should definitely check that out too. It's been mentioned a couple times.
Hi, my name's Allison. I'm from the Urbano Project in Jamaica Plain, and I'm just curious if you could speak a little bit to the relationship between the people in the neighborhood that you worked with and the data about that neighborhood, and kind of how aware of their own data you found people to be, and whether that was a resource that they felt like they had access to, and kind of just what their relationship is with the data that you've been collecting about their neighborhood.
I honestly don't think they. If you ask them how much worse like our shootings in our neighborhood compared to others, I don't think most people could tell you. But there's one of these videos that the kids shot. It's like my neighborhood is really, really great, except there are shootings. There are a lot of shootings, but it's really great. And it's it's like I think this is the importance of harvesting the data and shaping it. I think data gives you kind of a nervous system for the community that you live in, and especially with more and more data being collected, we're becoming more aware of our surroundings. But there's a lot more data produced than data harvested, and I think slowly the tools are coming out, and and we're becoming more aware of how to harvest these and how to become more aware, so that as in the past decade has shooting rates spiked and you don't know it, like that shouldn't happen anymore. But I think that's why we're here today.
Should we watch this video? It's only 1 minute long.
Is it this one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the neighborhood, Dorchester, Olney Street. Here we have what we like to call a haunted house. Guys who lived there last, they were selling drugs. There's now an ongoing investigation about something that happened in the neighborhood. There's always something happening in the neighborhood. So is my friend Billy. Billy, what do you think of this neighborhood?
Well, it's Dorchester, It's not the best, but it's also not the worst. It's actually pretty peaceful for this part of Dorchester. See right there, some guy, he got shot there.
He got shot right here. His head actually hit the gates, and blood was running, right there, away. I actually saw him, like his head, there was blood around it, and it's ridiculous.
And it is pretty peaceful.
Yeah, so they set this thing up. Respect, little brother, bro.
Hi, my name's also Allison, and I'm from the McCormick School of Policy and Global Studies at UMass, and I'm glad you went back to the video. I'm kind of more of a data person, but I'm really interested in using data to tell stories. So as a data person, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you recruited the kids that you gave flip cameras to, whether you know, had a lot of trouble getting the cameras back from kids, and whether they had any instructions at all about what kind of video you wanted them to shoot.
So, so our video team had a lot to do with this, and they're fantastic. And our reporters actually knew most of these, you know, all of these kids. So there was kind of a prior relationship with them, and there was a concern. So the conversation went something like this: like, I was like, we should give these kids flip cams, and we were like, other people were like, we're not going to get them back, or what if they don't return them? And we're like, oh, they're just flip cams. You don't need them anymore. So like, that's kind of like, while we knew that we didn't need to get them back, the idea of giving somebody something, I think, and somebody that you had a prior relationship to, I think was a really smart move on the multimedia team's part to say, you know, this belongs to us. However, we want you to have it so that, and bring us something back with it. And it was, you know, it kind of reminded me of when like elementary school kids send around a teddy bear around the world and they get it back, like, while mailing it to each other. And it was really, I think, something that we should take more advantage of at some point to think about saying, you know, we're making an investment in you to get us something. Did I answer all your questions?
Did you give them any specifics?
Oh, instructions. From as far as I know, I think the instructions were like, document your life, or take video of your life and things that happen in it. But I mean, they're kids, so I don't know if they listen. I think they just kind of. I think the mindset, from what I understand, was, holy crap, what I shoot's going to be in the Boston Globe. This is really cool. So.
Hi, my name is Jason DeRosa, and I'm a student here, a graduate student in the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs, as well as the community engagement liaison for the Circle of Promise, the Mayor's Initiative. And Bowdoin-Geneva is a neighborhood that I work very closely with on a couple of different projects and initiatives. And I know she's not here anymore, but a woman had asked about the relevance of the 4500 data that you had put up, the mayor's hotline, regarding abandoned properties and that kind of data. And something that we've been able to do now at city level is overlap that data with 911 calls. And kind of look at, you know, kind of intimately at Bowdoin-Geneva, for example, like the absent landlords and, like, you know, those kind of calls are directly related to, like, shootings, for example, because what I've always said is that violence is a symptom, and, you know, the poverty or whatever you have going on in these neighborhoods is what's kind of driving it. And I just wanted to know, like, what kind of intimate details, I guess, is the hard data giving you that's kind of influencing or informing the qualitative stuff.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because we mapped the 911 calls as well and put it on top of the murder data, and we saw very similar things. I mean, so I think the premise of us going into the neighborhood was that violence was a symptom, and we wanted to know what was going on. And I don't know how many of you read, like, however many thousands of words that we wrote about the neighborhood, but the underlying theme was, like, here are all these different factors or things that are going on that are causing these symptoms. So, so I think the project as a whole addressed that. I don't know if we, as a graphics data team, did. But I mean, I think you're right. I think the intimate details pulling out of data are, you know, absolutely crucial. And we hit on that a lot with, like, our social media initiative with Instagram and with these video projects. And but we never got, you know, this is something that we're always working on to try to pull out. In fact, one of the interesting things from the complaints data was on the day of the Boston Marathon, there's a handful of people calling in to say, you know, thank you the city for working that day. And I mean, those are always really fun to look through, those, like, one-offs where people call in. People calling for, like, how do I get a massage? Like, that's in the database, so. And the city doesn't provide that yet, so maybe next year.
Rachel Kestner from Elder Service Plan of the North Shore based in Lynn. And these stories are so inspiring and invigorating, I think, to all of our missions here. I wanted to know if there were other similar data visual stories that you have in the back of your head that inspired you and maybe, gave you an idea of how you wanted to set something up, or I don't know if there's other resources you can share in that vein of stories similar to this one.
Like all out like projects per se, or
where data and the story and the visual part kind of all comes together in another topic or another part of the world that maybe inspired you.
You mean you outside the globe? You're talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there's an emerging community of journalists who are hacker people who are trying to find different ways to tell the story. I mean, the Times always does really fascinating things, and NPR, the Times, sometimes the Washington Post, us, of course. The one that I really like from recently, the New York Times had this bicycle map, because the New York Times just introduced their Hubway type, their version of New York just introduced their version of the Hubway, and I'm from New York, so initially I was just like, oh geez, this is just going to cause a whole bunch of hipsters to get on bikes and crash them into walls, and the Times just kind of took advantage of that and said, okay, let's map this and let's ask people to annotate what are good places to bike through and where are not good places to bike through, and tell us about what you're seeing in these areas. And I thought that was really a clever way of not only reaching deep into this community, but also asking the community to contribute to this platform. And so we're trying to think more and more about these more and more about how we create little common areas for people, as opposed to here's all this data set here's a huge static data set that we crunched, and then here's this output that we have. I hope that answered your question.
One of the, as Alvin said, is this growing community, and what's becoming clear is that there's so many ways to tell stories now, just using data and to help people out, and it's the surface is just being scratched. Not only has the amount of data being released for public consumption just exploding at all levels of government, but the tools are getting much easier, and as that happens, people getting a lot more creative. Alvin and I and a couple other people at the Globe worked on this thing called Dreamtown Finder, and the whole idea was, it was kind of a fun project, but the whole idea was that we would create this little slider scale so that you could work on finding what would be the best town for you to live in, and there was all sorts of indexes on crime and education and a little hipster indexes that just came up a minute ago, based on the number of Starbucks, and what else was there, Whole Foods and things like that, and it was really fun, and we got huge feedback on it. And I actually wrote a couple stories on it, which, to be perfectly honest, I thought were superfluous. So it was the index was the fun thing, and but there's just more and more stuff like that, and people are creating new stuff every day. It's amazing how fast the field is changing. So
there is one I have in mind, but come see me afterward, because I just can't think of where it's from. But I saw it, and I spent an hour on it. So.
And when we covered the Boston Marathon bombings, as breaking news, we were doing interactives immediately. Day one, day two, we Alvin and Gabriel and actually my team at Globe Lab pitched in, and that was just a kind of instinctual reaction to the news, we need to do. We did 3 or 4 within 48 hours that were really engaging and really successful, I think. So that was another. I think it's just become a dial tone default reaction to way to tell stories.
Susie Flug with the Massachusetts Service Alliance and the Commonwealth Corps, and also want to thank you for sharing your time and knowledge. And as with a lot of the questions, I just had some logistical, practical questions, so it's really helpful to hear about the tools that you're using. I also wanted to make sure that I heard right about the timeline thing, timeline JS, the letters.
Yep.
And then a couple other logistical questions. Having given young people flip cams before, I've never heard the sound be that good. So if you did special sound stuff, or if they gave any attachments, And then also some of the permissions that were spoken about. The Instagram thing was really cool, and it sounds like people actually contacted the individuals per permission. So what you did when you found video or photos from minors and how you worked to get permission from their parents or guardians. Thanks.
I believe the FlipCam audio was cleaned up by our multimedia team. And then I'll pass the Instagram question to Chris.
All of the Instagrammers that we contacted were definitely grown-ups. There were some images of kids in there. I'm not sure if they, specifically made sure that the people that we're talking to were the guardians of those kids, but that's a good question. But it was definitely from the get-go, we wanted to contact the photographers, the Instagrammers, for two reasons. One is we're a newspaper and we like to give credit, and we like to not, use things that we don't have the rights to. But also, we wanted to add context. So, it was. I feel like, just throwing up an Instagram photo is not enough. We can add a lot more than that. And that was a sort of a prototype for an approach that we've taken in other areas as well. So it was a learning experience for us there. But we kind of messed around with how do we actually do this, because Instagram doesn't have direct messages. You can't actually message somebody. So we would the only way to really reach somebody is by using the tools that Instagram gives, and we kind of iterated on those and tried a bunch of things that didn't work. So the first thought was, let's create a Instagram account called Globe Official Instagram or something like that, and let's write a standard comment that we're going to post in there, and that completely didn't work. People were just like very low response rate. We gradually made it more and more personal and more Instagrammy, to the point where we got really good response, about 50% response rate, to friending the person, liking the photo, and writing a genuine personal comment from an editor or a writer's real account, genuine Instagram account, that was like, hey, I really love this photo, great shirt, whatever. Would love to learn more about it. And so you could tell that it's a real person, and they've complimented you and stuff like that. And at that point, it became a much more efficient process. But it took us a while to get there.
There's a lot of thinking about digital interaction, because, reporters are really, or newspapers are really good at interacting in person, but then online, like silly us decided to go throw up a Globe official account on Instagram, and that's just intimidating, or just doesn't belong there. And so this is stuff that we're figuring out, and stuff that we're learning, and stuff that that we're starting to delve into these new places and understand the language and understand the etiquette of those places.
And it's an interesting exercise. It's like, what is, if Instagram allows people, photographs are a huge part of what newspapers do, and I've always done. It's showing photos of people in Boston to other people in Boston, and we were the only ones that could do that. But now Instagram lets people kind of report what they're up to via photograph directly to each other. So what role do we play there? And in our experiments with Instagram, we've been trying to answer that question in different ways. Do we provide just a piece of software that lets people view these photos in a different way? Or can we be curators and adders of context and interpreters? And I think that's the end that we came down on with Instagram, and it's I think it was viewed as a successful part of the project, and it's influenced other projects that we've done as well.
I think we had a question.
Hi, I'm Amy Shang from Fuel Education. In terms of reporting news or sharing content online using multimedia interactive platform, I like to know, for a lot of small nonprofit or organizations, maintaining our own website, how do you solicit feedback? How do you analyze trafficking, and how do you strategize optimization, that kind of website strategy, when people are viewing your content?
Okay, so first question is what was the first part? I didn't get the first part. I'm sorry.
How do you track the traffic? How do you track the feedback?
Well, so it depends on how deeply you want to do this. Like Google Analytics is fantastic. You can do it to you can track analytics to such a deep level, including interaction with like buttons on your page. So that's usually, I mean, we have obviously our own analytics, but for my own personal stuff, I definitely recommend Google Analytics. I think the other part was how do you track engagement, and so all these analytics tools let you track engagement, like how long people spent on the page, so on and so forth. I think the part that we always forget to do is to design for a use case. So how long do you expect someone to spend on your page? Because like sometimes you don't design for 1 minute engagement. You design for 5-second engagement, which is fine. And so that's kind of something that we always keep in mind is how long do we expect people to spend on the page? Because it's fine if they spend 3 seconds on the page if that's all they need to spend on the page for. So that there's kind of like the two-sided approach there. The other thing is, did you ask about how to solicit like feedback on it? So I think for us, we don't really have to worry about it because we'll hear the complaints anyway. But that said, I think people don't always tell you, like what people tell you won't always be how you should react to that feedback, and you should be designing the analytical feedbacks so that, for example, like, do you want to know how often people get to the bottom of your page? Like, you should be tracking for that. Or do you want to know how often people click on like menu buttons? Like, for example, the on top of this page, the all male female button, like people just didn't see that and no one clicked on it. And so those are the kinds of things I think designing ways to get feedback that are beneficial, that help you reach your goals. And once you understand that, once you design these things for a very specific goal, then you get the feedback you want. If you just ask like, what do you think of it? Then people are gonna not, you're not gonna get good feedback. Or even if people tell you like how much they loved it, like, I don't believe it when people tell me that because, like that's not helpful. It's just, did you spend 12 minutes on the page? Like, oh, fantastic. Like, that's what I want to know. So.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Marissa Luce, and I'm with Discover Roxbury. I actually did a lot of violence prevention work in the Bowdoin-Geneva area, Fields Corner area, so I'm very familiar with the area. And so it seems like with being able to tell your story very effectively, there's so many levels to this being a successful effort. So from what data, what are your goals, and what data are you trying to collect, the relationship building aspect, who you're talking to in the community, and how do you engage those folks, outreach and all of that. And so trying to understand, like with this particular project, I was curious, like, did the reporters also go out and connect with other community-based organizations or connect with some of the, because there's been many violence prevention initiatives in that area and that have for many years been trying to collect all this data about what's the needs of the community, the violence in the community and so forth for many years. And so did you also engage those folks as well in this process, and then especially or youth programs too, because they're working with many of the young people in the community. Because I actually was a little concerned about what was the follow-up with these young people in the videos, because they're sharing these very conflicting feelings, about their community, and there's certainly more of a story there than someone got shot on my street, and but it's generally a peaceful neighborhood. And so I'm just curious about all of that, because we really would want to be very intentional about how we tell our stories and how much time it spends for us to be able to do it effectively.
The reporters did reach out to a number of the different groups working in the neighborhoods. I don't know the names offhand because I was more involved in the data, but they spent a lot of time working with those people to find other people in the neighborhood to talk with. And I know we're saying about that these people are all just telling one little piece of the story in the videos and stuff. And I think that was kind of what the whole thrust of the story about was, trying to tell or try to present a picture of the neighborhood through residents' eyes. And the videos were one little piece of that. So that's what we tried to do.
And I think the feedback or the fallout. So a lot of stories we do, the fallout is, you know, the tail for the fallout isn't very long. So it, you know, people are like, oh, they talk about it for a week and that's it. With this project, this is probably like the 8th panel I've sat on for Bowdoin-Geneva, and every single time it's spurred a conversation about you know, hyper-local coverage from an organization like this, or there was one panel where it was Bowdoin-Geneva residents who came, and it was very contentious, but it spurred a great conversation. So it's been really interesting to see. Initially, I was like, man, this is a huge investment. I don't think people are going to read this. Like, I don't think enough people are going to read 20,000 words for it to be worth it. But then you see like the fallout from it, and you see the multiple conversations that it's spurred. And I think we can't view this as like the Boston Globe is painting the history of, or the story of the neighborhood. I think it's the Boston Globe has started a conversation about the neighborhood.
Unfortunately, that was our last question. So if you want to wrap it up, and then you're all welcome to lunch outside the ballroom and then on the indoor quad as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. We'll be up here to chat if you need to.
Thank you.